Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to Modular. Today we're looking at the Erica Synths Black Dual ASR envelope. Oh yes, an envelope. Now I know what you're thinking, how interesting can an envelope possibly be? Well, quite interesting is the answer to that. With the Dual ASR EG envelope generator, you get a pair of simple, obvious, straightforward, just the kind of thing that you need type envelopes, plus a load of other jiggery-pokery going on, which kind of makes it a half-decent replacement for a Make Noise Maths. Now that's quite a claim, because the Maths is one of these legendary modules that everybody has to have that does all sorts of crazy stuff. But actually, often, certainly from my point of view, when using the Maths, I'm largely using it as an envelope. And an envelope which can be interestingly modulated. And that's exactly what the Dual ASR envelope generator is. But before we get into the sticky stuff, let's just give it a quick go, just to give you a feel of the regular envelope-y type things it can do. That sort of thing. Enveloping, you get the idea, yeah? There's nothing unusual going on. So why is it an ASR envelope as opposed to an ADSR envelope? Well, that's a good question. ASR essentially gives you the attack coming up. It gives you however long you hold on to that note, and then it gives you the decay going away. Or is it release going away? Well, decay and release tend to be sort of interchangeable terms to some degree, in that it's labelled attack decay, but it's an attack sustain release envelope. Does it matter? No, not really. I mean, generally speaking, when you're talking about an envelope, you're talking about an ADSR. So you've got attack, then you've got decay, then you've got sustain, then you've got release. We're very familiar with that shape. Now, if you're anything like me, you are usually missing out some or all of those stages. So I would commonly use an envelope either with a sustain all the way up, so I've just got attack and then it goes along and then release, or I take sustain all the way down and I've just got attack decay. Those tend to be the two ways that I use envelopes, but that's because envelopes for me don't really get along very well unless I'm doing something very long. I don't really feel that much of a need for an ADSR. However, ADSRs can be very versatile because they can be long things and they can also be short things. The ASR envelope sort of sits somewhere in the middle. It has some definite advantages, some less advantages, call them disadvantages, I suppose. But there are definitely some things that they are ideally suited for, particularly in Eurorack. But before we go any further, let me show you what the thing is. And then we'll patch some stuff together, try to give you an example of what's possible, what it can do, some patch examples maybe, and have a bit of fun with it. Because as hopefully you saw earlier, it's immensely playable. I mean, you know, you just fiddle and it does stuff. I mean, often with envelopes you have them sitting set doing what they're doing and you kind of leave them to it. But this really does ask you to say, get stuck in, start fiddling with it, start fiddling with that, and it rewards that kind of interaction. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so this let's have a look. Let's have a look at what the module has stuffed on the front. All right. So here we have knob at the top, attack. So you've got to see this as two envelope generators split exactly down the middle. You've got attack, you've got decay, or release, depending on how you feel about it. You've got a manual button, which is nice, so that can fire the envelope. As you can see, the light stays on and follows the envelope through its attack stage and its decay stage. You have at the top here two loop switches. You can turn them into loops. So these are loopable envelopes, just like you'd have on something like the maths. Because on the maths you would have rise and fall. This is similar, but not exactly that. And I'll show you what I mean about that in a little bit. So you've got looping envelopes, which change their speed depending on how much attack and decay is in use. Put them back to normal envelopes. You've then got CV control over the attack and the decay. On the next row you've got gate input for both of them. Now one interesting thing is that they are normalized between the two. So if you have a gate coming in to gate 1, it will fire both envelopes. That's extraordinarily useful. It really is. Otherwise, you can fire them separately by plugging another gate into the other one. Like so. And now they're doing their own thing. They've both got end of cycle outputs. So this sends a trigger or a gate at the end of its cycle. So you can use that for triggering something else at the end of the envelope. You could use it for triggering the next envelope, potentially creating a more complex envelope over time. And then at the bottom you've got your envelope outputs, EG1, EG2. You've also got a bipolar output, which is probably best used when it's in loop mode. Right, just to show you the shape of the envelope, I'm going to use my keyboard here. I'm sorry about the rain. In the meantime, I've got the keyboard connected up to gate the envelope and to also control the pitch of the oscillator. You can see in the scope here, I've got the envelope output going into the scope before it goes into the VCA. So you can see exactly what the envelope is doing, as well as here, what the envelope is doing. So as I increase the attack, you will see that on the scope. It can go quite long, all told. And extremely snappy. Now this is an ASR envelope, and so its purpose is to hold on to that note. You're not triggering the envelope, or are we? We'll come to that in a moment. We are gating the envelope. We are hitting the attack stage. We are then holding it for as long as the note holds. And then the release stage happens when I release. That's the attack, sustain, release. So what that is ideal for is gating. What do I mean? Well, I mean we have sequencers that do a lot of gate shenanigans, lots of gate changing about, lots of interesting rhythmic pulses and bits and pieces that are involved in gates. If you are just triggering an envelope, those sorts of things are lost because you don't get the different lengths going on with a trigger. With a gate you do, and that's why ASR envelopes are interesting. Let me demonstrate that quickly with the arpeggiator on the key step 37. Now it's a very short sound because the gate length is set very low. If I increase the gate length, it follows. I can add just that little bit of release to it. Let's bring that back to like that. So I can either have it very, very sharp, or start allowing the release to blossom and then they start to flow into each other. Similarly, I can bring up the attack. And again, as I increase the gate length, so where gating gets interesting is with sequencers. For instance, the black sequencer here. Why don't we take something out of that, plug that in, because this does lots of lovely things. So we put a tune into the first channel to our oscillator, and we're going to take the gate, which is coming out of here, plug that into the gate output on the black sequencer. You can see that the gates are all different lengths within the black sequencer, and that is being fully realised by the envelope. I can ruin it entirely by bringing the decay up. Let me magic in a few more gates. So while we have this going on, this second envelope is all firing away. So why don't we use that for something interesting, like the cutoff on the filter. At this point, we hit one of the interesting disadvantages of the ASR envelope, which is that both of these are being gated at the same time. So what happens is both of their attack stages happen, then their sustain stage happen, and that happens for as long as the gate is gated, for as long as that note is held. And it's only when the note is released, when it comes to the end of the gate, does the decay part of the envelope happen. And so if you are looking to get a decay, like a release sweep onto a filter, that can only happen when the note is released. When the note is released, the first envelope is already closing that sound down. So you have this situation where you're trying to get this envelope to control and modulate the filter, but there's no sound left for it to do it to. Does that make sense? Let me show you that again. So there's, no matter what I do here, you can see in the scope how the envelope is changing. I'm not getting the opportunity to control the filter because the sound is already shut down, because this envelope here is so low. Now if I increase the decay on the first one, we'll then start to get the effect of this envelope coming through. But of course I'm now sort of losing the gating effect that my lovely gates from the black sequencer is doing. Have a bit more luck with the attack if I want that slow come in. So while the sustain part of the ASR is offering you an interesting way in dealing with gating from a sequencer, you're losing the ability that you have on a triggerable envelope to do a quick envelope during the course of another sound. That all sounds horribly complicated. I don't mean it to, but I think you've got the impression of what I'm trying to say. Now, we can get around this because the dual ASR EG accepts both a gate and a trigger. You can use it kind of in two different modes. So I can gate one envelope and trigger the other one. So it's not going to wait for the end of that note to do its whole thing. To do that, I need some triggers. Now I can take some triggers out of the third output of the black sequencer. Stick that into the gate input on number 2. If I go to my modulation channel and set it up to be triggers, I can then have a very different experience. Now you can effectively turn both of them into simple AR, rise, fall, attack, release envelopes just by using a trigger on the input. So I'm just using it on channel 2 at the moment. If I put it into the front one, then they can all enjoy that sort of thing and you can then play with them differently. If I take all of the gates and put them down to pretty much nothing, then that's acting far more like a trigger. So I've taken that down to the lowest possible value, and then I can just use the first envelope as attack release, as attack decay, whichever way you want to look at it, as a simple triggered envelope. And I can do the same with the second one because they are normalized to each other. could use an alternative sequencer like the Sonic Stochastic here and take CV out from there and trigger out rather than a gate output. Let's have a look at the loop mode. It's a great way to get a really playful sort of envelope where I can be shifting it from sort of sawtooth to triangle to ramp and back again. You can also have quite a bit of fun mixing the two waveforms together. I've just patched these into a little mixer over here at the side, just mixing the two waveforms together, which can give you interesting things, particularly when you start applying modulation to the attack and decay knobs. Lovely. Now it has a couple of other special powers. One of them is that in loop mode you can actually get drones out of them. One last feature is that through a pair of jumpers on the back you can actually reduce the length of time of the envelope to make it a shorter, snappier envelope if you so wish. I'll leave one on and one off so that we can see the difference. So as you can see in drone mode, that's going to give you a higher note. Let's stop all that nonsense and look at it as an envelope. So envelope number 1 is now set to short mode as opposed to longer mode, which is the default. And that should give us a shorter envelope when compared to the other one. As you can see. So there you go, a bit of a play, bit of a fiddle around with the Erica Synths Black Dual ASR EG envelope generator. What do we think? It's good. What I like about it is how, because it's an ASR and I don't have this sort of envelope anywhere else in my rig, it makes full use of the gating that you have in something like the Black sequencer or other sequencers that I have. So often, I mean, for instance, when I use the maths as an envelope, it's just an AR. It just pings and it does its thing. And so any sustain, any gating is lost. It just doesn't seem to be there. Whenever I'm using an ADSR, I tend to be either putting a sustain full on or full off, depending on what sort of envelope that I'm after. So actually, I find myself wanting an ASR envelope without even knowing really what that means or what that is. And so when this comes along and lands in my rig, I find that it is actually filling the hole that I didn't even know that I had. this ability to hold the note and just release. It's simple. You get the attack, you hold the note, and then you release it. None of this moving about business, just good standard sequencing, just giving me the ability to run a melody of notes with interesting gating opportunities without having to fuss over the envelope. But then the flip side of it is that it wants you to fuss with it. It makes it very easy. I mean, it's like if you're playing something like a standard synth and it's got an ADSR envelope on there, you tend to just be fiddling with the decay often, or you're fiddling with the release. There's only one control really you tend to be fiddling with. And that's what this brings you in to do. I can fiddle with the decay and I can fiddle with the attack, and I know what they are and I know what they mean, even though it's an ASR and it's supposed to be released, or is it? Those things don't matter, because you can feel the increasing ramp and you can feel the increasing release, which feels like sustain. Again, these terms get a little bit muddled up with each other, but it doesn't matter. Ultimately, what you get is two envelopes which are just doing the business of sequencing in your rack. I really like the way that they're linked together. It's similar with the Behringer 2500 envelopes. It's the first time that I saw that linking of an envelope where you have a gate normalized to the second one. So you can run the two things from a single gate, which allows you to run a VCA and a filter. It's a really top feature that I think every envelope, if you get them in a pair, should be able to do. Otherwise, I guess you could emulate it through a mult or something like that, but it's just very handy that it's built in because you know they're going to be tied together perfectly. And then once you get past the envelope side of things, you've got some interesting LFOs that you can shape. Again, wanting you to play with them. LFOs you so often, I often tend to set and forget. You leave them doing their little thing and they're just meandering about doing their stuff. Again, in here, it's wanting you to go wop, 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 back again. Like I do on the maths. I do that with the rise and fall all the time. And this brilliantly gives me that in this smaller, blacker package. And then with things like the end of cycle and the CV control over the attack and the decay, it lends itself to more interesting experimental meanderings. Things like putting that Krell patch in. It's fascinating. It's a simple thing just to be able to ramp that up so you get this increasing vibrato or increasing tremolo or increasing something or other, which is moving stuff about. So although it's just an envelope, it's just an envelope. You stick it on and you often forget about it. It has a lot of other stuff in there which you can get creative with, you can move stuff about with, and actually it becomes a place that you can play rather than just a utility modulation module. I like the fact that it can change from an ASR into an AR. I don't like the fact as much that you have to then find a trigger elsewhere. I think there should really, probably, ideally, be a switch on the module just to switch it between gating and triggering. Either one, both of them, or at the same time. And that will save you from having to try to find another source if your sequencer just does gates. Because back in the old days, keyboards, CV keyboards used to have your pitch out, your gate, and a trigger out in order to re-trigger the envelope was the idea. And so you could use the trigger out to give you just that ping type envelope. But keyboards don't have that now. Sequencers tend to have a gate output or a trigger output as opposed to both. So a feature request for the next version of this is just to stick in the ability to switch between gate and trigger so that you don't have to do that in your sequencer. But with useful things like the mod output on the black sequencer or just reducing the gate down to a very small amount, you can get that AR type thing going on. So there you are. Obviously there's tons and tons you can do with a filter. You can plug it into all sorts of things. And during this demonstration, I've just used the same oscillator, the same filter, same VCA all the way through. But there's a huge amount that one could do with it. But I hope that's helpful. I hope that's given you an idea as to what is possible with the black ASR EG. And if you're interested in that Krell patch that I did earlier and have no clue as to what that was about, but thought that might be interesting, then it's actually very simple. And I'm going to do a separate video on that. But there you are. And in the meantime, go and make some tunes.